Hey, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the show. Tonight's show is a special pre-recorded broadcast that I'm doing with Mark Passio. You can check his site. It's whatonearthishappening.com.
Popeye, thanks so much for having me. It's always a pleasure to be on your show. The people of the world have their mindset, and that's what needs to change. The reason we need to understand their mindset is so we can get out of it. Most people are living in a satanic worldview and don't even know it. They don't even know it because they grew up that way. That's how their parents taught them, and that's how they're going to teach their children. And that's the definition of actually not being raised in consciousness. It's not actually developing a true conscience, because developing a true conscience and leaving the animalistic instincts and the base animalistic ways of behavior behind and moving upward in consciousness to become truly human. What that entails is the development of a conscience. And we can't ever really truly develop a conscience unless we understand this dark and separatist worldview enough to climb out of it, to actually raise ourselves up and out of that black-hearted, low-minded worldview that really has everybody in its thrall. And they propagate that worldview every single day in their media, on television, in their newspapers and magazines. This is all you'll really see, is we need to do what's in our best interest and everyone else be damned. And that's what's going to happen. You know, that's their mindset. And that's how they want everybody thinking. They want everybody saying, I need to only worry about me. I need to only worry about my situation. This is what the mindset cops are in. Police and military are totally in this mindset. I'm a military guy. I'm going to go and join the military, and I'd be willing to drop bombs on people just because, I'll get a free education and I'll get a paycheck and I'll get a pension. I go into the police force because I want to have a job that's secure and have a pension and a good paycheck. And I don't care whether I'll be asked to abuse rights. I'm not there to question that. I'm not there to ask people whether there's actual right behind that action. I'm not there to think. I'm there to unquestioningly follow orders and just go and do what I'm told as long as I get that paycheck, because all I'm worried about is me. See, that's the mindset. And people want to deny that and say that isn't the mindset of most of these people. It absolutely is the mindset of these individuals. That's their mindset. You could bring up a million examples of how their actions are actually in violation of other people's rights. And they'll say, yeah, but this is my situation. I got a family to feed, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Endless amounts of justifications. And I'm telling you right now, the people who are in ownership, not just direction of, at the highest levels, they are Satanists. And I'm telling you from firsthand experience, and when they are taking people to groom into the hierarchy, the satanic hierarchy networks, okay, which after you would be groomed out of one of these lower level networks that interfaces with the public, you would go up into other think tank groups, or you would go up into other affiliate orders. Okay, so the Skull and Bones order is much higher on this. But again, that's mostly a bloodline connected thing. And, you know, the elite are mostly running something like that. That's much higher up in the hierarchy, as is something like the Club of Rome, which, you know, in something like that, you're not going to work your way up into that. That's something like you're either born into, or you have extreme power through and connection through some other mechanism of finance or media, and therefore you're welcomed into an outer circle within a group like that. But there's always an inner circle that's bloodline. This grooming process, again, is attempting to identify the psychopathic individuals. I was never like an actual psychopath, but my worldview made me have tendencies that actually were quite psychopathic. And this is what I would say you can see in the police and the military of the modern world. They are basically indoctrinated, and then through their rituals, which mimic trauma-based mind control rituals, they are actually being turned into psychopathic individuals. Again, I'm not going to use the word actual psychopaths, because there's a difference between a life psychopath, or a psychopath that is born a psychopath. And there is such a thing as people who are simply born without the ability to experience emotion. What I'm referring to is a created psychopath. I'll distinguish that by saying that they are psychopathic, that this is a condition that their brain and therefore their psyche is existing in, and they have been conditioned to be that way through segregation from society, repetition, breaking someone down physically, feeding them only certain types of foods, exposing them to only certain types of ideas and media, etc. These are the classical techniques of any cult. What I've just described are the methodologies through which the police and military indoctrinate their initiates, because it is a system of initiation into a cult. It's no different than initiation into the dark occult schools, okay? It's the same thing. You set the society up as separate than everybody else. We're over here and everybody else is over there. They don't do this amongst the public. In training for the military, you go to boot camp and you stay there and you're completely segregated. So segregation is a big part of this. Then it's repetition. Okay, it's ritual, always doing the same thing over and over and over again on a repeating schedule. The greatest form of mind control is endless repetition and ritual, okay, because these are things all associated with the base brain, the reptilian mind. Fear, that's another thing that's used. It's trauma. That's what it really is. You're breaking down the personality of the individual because you want them to be completely identified with groupthink. It's the same thing in a cult, in any cult. It's the same thing in basically any religion. You're saying, this is who you are. You're not like any of the other people. This is your set of beliefs. This is how we do things. It's a repeated thing over and over and over again, the same words, the same movements, the same gestures, okay? And fear is a big part of it in, like let's take military boot camp for an example. You don't know when something might happen. The drill instructor might come in and put you through, all kinds of different rigorous, strenuous physical tests. And that might happen at 4 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah,
when
it's
you were
called
out of a dead sleep.
When you're at least when I went to boot camp when I was in the Coast Guard, it was called the Performance Enhancement Platoon. And what they did to all the new recruits, the new companies that would come in, like the big, the first week is indoctrination week. Anyway, you're getting shots and everything else.
Right.
So usually during that, it's interesting how they call it indoctrination week. Wow. When you look back on it and you know about mind control, you're like, wow, dude, the levels of mind control boot camp. We could do a show about that by itself. But anyway, they bring in this group, and these are the screw-ups, and they put them in this special little platoon, and they call it PEP, the Performance Enhancement Platoon. They make them walk around with red belts on, and with their right arm at a 90-degree angle to the deck, which would be the ground. So you could only imagine that kind of looks like little Nazis walking around, right? And everywhere they go, every time they make a step, they have to say the word PEP. Now, they do this to embarrass them, they say. But once you understand mind control, you realize what they're doing. And what they did to the new groups is every week, the first week, they would bring these guys in at like 4 o'clock in the morning, and they would go into the head of each of the barracks rooms. And usually each squad room would hold, we had, I think, 60 guys in our squad room, 3 bunks 3 levels high, and there was 60 or 80 of us in there, something like that. And they brought them in at 4 o'clock in the morning and beat the crap out of these guys. Now the head is what in naval terms or in the Coast Guard or the Marine Corps you call a bathroom. And they would bring them. The bathrooms were big enough that there was multiple sinks, you could shave in them, and there was a group shower, and they take away your dignity, too. The first night you're there, before you even do anything, as soon as you get off the bus, within 15 minutes, they make you strip down naked and climb into a shower with a bunch of other guys. And they make the females do the same thing. You got to strip in front of each other and then get dressed. They give you sweatpants and stuff to a pair of sweatpants and a t-shirt to wear pretty much for the first day, and then you go pick up your gear and stuff. But that's all breaking people down. Anyway,
it's about conforming them to one way of being that is completely it has stripped them of any uniqueness, any part of the original.
Oh, they totally rip your individuality out. They even tell you at the end of boot camp, the last like 2 days, you sit down with the drill instructors. At least when I was there, that's what they did with us. And these guys that were total dickheads to us for 8 weeks were suddenly treating us as we were like part of the group, because we had gone through this quote unquote initiation of 8 weeks of hell, and training. And they tell you right off the bat, like somebody asked them, why you guys are so nice. You seem to be so nice, like as normal human beings. Why are you such dickheads to us? And they laughed and they were like, that's our job. That's what we're trained to do. And they explained that they go to drill instructor boot camp and all this other stuff. And they told us like part of drill instructor boot camp is they make them stand and yell at a tree for like 8 hours, Mark. So that they can learn how to be completely degrading and insulting, and they do it because they say the tree won't cry and run away.
Well, people may think, what does comparing the military and police's indoctrination methods have to do with Satanism? Okay, and I would say it has everything to do with it, because again, you have to understand the main ideological tenets of this religion to really deeply grasp how this religion is really what's in control. When I was in this, I guess you could call it cult, they referred to the people who actually we think of as the controller class, the military and police. They would refer to them as their dogs, because they know that at the highest levels of the hierarchy, their people are in control of these groups. I mean, all you really need to do is look at the fact that Michael Aquino, in charge of the Army's psychological warfare unit for years, and this guy was simultaneously the head of one of the largest West Coast, or the largest West Coast, one of the largest in the world, I should say, dark occult orders, the Temple of Set. He was brought up on charges for child abuse and pedophilia.
He was named in the Franklin cover-up. There were witnesses that named him as an abuser. Sure. And if you look up Kathy O'Brien and Mark Phillips, she even says in her book, The Transformation of America, and for the listeners that aren't sure, Kathy O'Brien is a mind control survivor, and she's come forward with what she knows. There's also a lady named Bryce, but I can't remember her last name. I think it's
Bryce Taylor.
That's what it is, Taylor. Another one. She's her book is amazing too. And Aquino's name is mentioned multiple times, and Kathy names him specifically as an abuser of of her daughter and herself. And she says that she talks about the Church of Set and everything else, and how he is just 110% into mind control. He knows how to mind control people. He's involved with creating these presidential models. So it's all linked together. So you have to understand that this is what they do. Mind control goes all the way back to Babylon. A lot of people are mistaken, and they think that it was some stuff that the Chinese invented, and and we picked up from Korea and then brought back here. No,
these are well-known techniques that are ancient, and Aquino is himself an expert in electronic forms of trauma-based mind control, where someone's brain is basically hit with enough electricity that you can create compartmentalization in the human psyche, or splinter personalities, to then program one of the individual personalities that's fractured off from the main personality in order to hide from the trauma. This is a psychological defense mechanism of the brain. Speaking of the name Set, though, again, this is the dark sun god in Egypt, and he was the opponent of Horus, who was the light sun god. He was considered a god of darkness. But there's another ancient Egyptian god that was considered the god of darkness and chaos as well. This connects back with something you just talked about, that these drills that did this performance enhancement, right? What were they called again?
Yeah.
PEPs.
PEP.
This brought to mind immediately the name APEP or APEP in Egyptian. Okay, Apep, if you look up this ancient Egyptian god, is the god of darkness and chaos. Their unit is called the Apep, actually, a PEP. Or
Yeah, performance enhancement platoon. Yeah, exactly.
Platoon, okay.
That's creepy. And just so the listeners know, Mark and I have never had a conversation about this off air ever before. So this is not something that we planned. This is really, that's creepy.
You told me what the name was, the anagram was, PEP. That's the first thing I immediately thought of was Apep in the Egyptian pantheon of gods. So, yeah, I mean, don't take my word for it. Look up Apep and you'll find
they used it to instill fear. And when I say instill fear, I can honestly tell people boot camp pushes you to your extremes, your limits, and it either makes you or breaks you. I've seen grown men break and come to the point of tears. I myself was pushed to my edge. I experienced one side of the spectrum to the other while I was there, and I can definitely say that there were experiences that I had that definitely still impact me to this day. And the way that, nothing, I wouldn't say anything for the bad because I understand about mind control and everything, but it did make me, I think, a little tougher than I was when I went in. And I was already a pretty tough, young guy when I went into the military and I went into boot camp, but it definitely changed me. And I know guys that never came back. They never came back to the person that they were beforehand. And you can see it's like a complete shift in personality. It's a little creepy when you think about it. Again, with the PEP platoon, it's really, I don't want to say weird, but it's interesting that you say how it was chaos and darkness, because that's what you felt coming off of this platoon. Whenever they had their own drill instructors that ran it. And the guys that ran it were the biggest dicks on the planet. I mean, if you breathed in the wrong direction, didn't matter if you weren't in their little platoon, they would come running up on you and they'd be like, I'll make sure you get in my platoon, I'll drag you. But I mean, there were a couple times where our drill instructors they were hardcore, they had to tell these guys to back off. And one of our drill instructors was, he was a former Marine and then he joined the Coast Guard when his 4 years with the Marine Corps was up. And this guy literally had a chest up to one of the other drill instructors in this squad. I noticed that there were while we were there, the 8-week period I was there, we had picked up their rotating shift of when they rotate a bunch of drill instructors out. I guess they realized that it was such a level of trauma that you couldn't keep people in there for too long a period of time. So they would only keep them in there for like 3 or 4 months, and they would put them back into a regular company of like 100 people. The only problem is once they came out of this PEP squad, from being the drill instructor for it, they were as equally screwed up as the people that they had in it. So they were never the same either. Right. And sure. I think they knew that they had to rotate these guys out, because if they left them in there for too long, these guys would have gone off the deep end. And I watched, a quick example, Mark. I watched one of these guys that he was in charge of the PEP platoon, and they rotated him out, and he was just probably a sociopath. He had a Napoleon complex. He was like 5'4", 120 pounds, and he had I have to be a dick to the whole world complex. Right. And he made an entire company of about 95 people march in place, double time, left, right. You have to do it double that fast, so it's left, right, right. They made 95 people do this for, it was almost 3 hours, and 80% of them passed out from exhaustion because he made them do it in full gear. They turned the air conditioning inside the building off, inside the barracks, and they made them do it in the main hallway upstairs. So when they closed all the doors and everything, it was like a sweat box. And I mean, there were literally puddles of sweat on the floor, and people were passing out.
It's a form of trauma-based mind control.
And they didn't get in trouble. They had one kid, the kid had a problem with looking at, drill instructors in the eye. You know how you're taught as a kid, don't look, or look people in the eye when you talk to them? They teach you the exact opposite. In boot camp, they teach you, do not look the drill instructor in the eye.
Right. Because he's a form of God. He's higher than you in the hierarchy, and therefore you're not on any kind of equal terms with him as a human being.
They tell you that. That's exactly what they say to you in boot camp. They say, I am God, you little pukes. You are nothing. You are dog shit. They do not care. And they literally break you down, and they tell you their whole goal, they tell you, in a nutshell, is to break you down so they can build you back up.
Right.
Into what they want.
Which is an automaton.
Exactly. And like you said, these elites, they call them their dogs. hence the term dog tags, and all the symbology, all the other stuff that they have,
Sure.
because they're willing to do it to their own kind. And they call us the dead, I believe, correct?
The general term for people who have no idea of their dark agenda and who have never looked into any of their ideologies, never have looked into any of their symbolism, can't read their symbolism, don't know what plan they have for them, which is basically eugenics and ultimately extermination. They call the average person who basically doesn't read books, sits in their house, wake up, go to work, come home, eat, watch TV, go to sleep, and then repeat the same pattern over and over and over again. They call people like that dead because they consider that they're not really intelligent, they're completely apathetic, and they'll just continue to do the same thing over and over again and not care that our rights are being taken away, not care that there's total social inequality and injustice in the world. You have the ability to use your mind, you have the ability to care about something, and then you have the ability to act on something. And they consider that the people of the world are basically not doing any of these three things, and they're not using them in any kind of higher capacity. And they basically don't do anything except the things that are required to procure enough money to put shelter around them, food on their table, and if there's any left over after that, maybe to have some form of entertainment or sexual escapade. And that's about the end of the extent that they act on anything. So therefore, if these three components of consciousness aren't activated, the occult rulers consider those people not alive, literally dead spiritually. And therefore, their rationale is, we're not doing this to real living people. We're doing this to people who are already robots, dead clumps of matter. They're not really human beings. That is literally how they think of this. I'm not paraphrasing or, putting my spin on this. I'm telling you that is exactly how they think of the average person. And what I want to get you to understand is the psychological profile that they're trying to work up. Just because you've been told you're allowed to do that, because some law's been written down in man's law books, even though this action completely goes against natural law, because it's actually arresting someone from engaging in their natural law rights, stopping them from doing an activity that they have every right to do. And this is what the police are doing on a day-to-day basis, just because they receive a paycheck to do it. Ultimately, that's the symbol of their God. In Satanism, the symbol that represents the dark god is money itself. Money is the symbol that represents the thing that gets people to go along with this dark force, that keeps consciousness down, that keeps consciousness low, that keeps people from ever recognizing the true self, that keeps people ever truly consciously recognizing the real differences between right and wrong. That's always accomplished through the occult power of money. They don't want to know the difference between right and wrong. They want moral license, which doesn't exist, to turn their back on the truth. That license does not exist. They want moral license not to exercise their own true free will. They want moral license not to exercise true personal responsibility. They want to hand their mind over to someone else who tells them what to do. And this is true of not just some of the people who are in military and police. There are blanket statements, 100%, bar none, statements that are true. And the statement that is true, that is a blanket statement here, is not one person who goes into one of these institutions, okay, is a true individual. Every one of them, in some form or another, wants to hand over their individuality to the hive collective mind, or they wouldn't be there. They wouldn't be doing it. They would not ever join that position. They would not ever go into that. It's not for a job. There's tons of other jobs that you can go and do and look into. And I don't care how bad the economy is. Ultimately, they identify with authority. They think that there is such a thing in this world as the authority of man. They've bought into this ideology, okay, that there's a hierarchy and it's based in authority that these people have, and they're allowed to do these things, even if it violates natural law, even if it violates the rights of the individual. It was written down. It says so in a book someplace. They're allowed to do that. So I'm not really doing anything that's wrong. You know, I've been given license and permission to do this because it's written down someplace in a book, scribbled down on some paper someplace, and it's called a law book. Ultimately, until they take that uniform off, until they stop identifying with the hive collective mind, are ever really born as an individual. And again, that psychologically stems from wanting to abdicate personal responsibility and free will to another person who they think can make a more informed decision than them because they want license not to think. That's the bottom line. And I'm telling you right now, that is also a satanic position. And not from the perspective of the higher level Satanists in the hierarchy. They actually want to be masters. Okay, but they're the foot soldiers of this satanic army, because the whole satanic army is about puppets on strings all the way down. And there's only one puppet master at the top. And that's not even in human form. That's a force. That's a disembodied force that is simply trying to eradicate free will.
I know myself. I was always an individual before I went in, but I can say that I had this big fight within myself because everything inside of me was screaming, you know, you're gonna have to give up your individuality and everything else. And it was always during the time that I was in the military, it was always this this inner battle that I had, and it did affect me more than I ever let anybody know. But it really bothered me. I mean, like, I used to tell people, you know, I feel like a big hypocrite when we go and bust, you know, drug smugglers, and not with coke or anything like that. That I felt at least I was doing something. But then I started to notice things about how the DEA would come in and pick up the drugs, and it would, like, they were complete dicks to us. You know, when we would offload it off the ship, and I used to ask them what they did with it, and one guy said sarcastically, "We burn it," and I was like, "Yeah, you burn it. You probably put it back on the street and sell it." You know, this is when I was in the military, and that kind of stuff started to, you know, that was my inner. That was, you know, the person I was, the individual fighting against this drone that they wanted me to. But I know after 9/11, again, another trauma-based mind control event, they used that to sucker people in that were individuals. Because I know so many people in the military that are artistically inclined, and they're beautiful human beings, and we would sit and have conversations, and I'm like, what the hell are you doing in the military? Right. You don't belong here. You know, I don't belong here. And I guess the awakening for me really occurred was when I got hurt. Because now I was no longer a useless drone, Mark. Now right. I was, you know, I was broken, and I was cast aside and replaced with a fresh 18-year-old. And I was like, wow. I was very disillusioned because I was golden boy one day, and the next day I was dog crap. And that's when that inner fight started to, you know, for the longest time it was always a 50-50 match, and then that was when it started that, you know, my inner self was like, I can't put up with this crap anymore. Right. You know. But see, they don't let you have any sort of individuality. I am covered in tattoos. When I was in the military, I would get tattooed all the time. Just like I get tattooed now, and sometimes even more so. And they tried to write me up and bring me up on charges for desecration of government property. Luckily, One of the corpsmen in there told the captain of the base to chill out, and pointed out guidelines that I could have tattoos, and he pretty much, you know, was able to get her off my rear end. But she wanted to bring me up on charges for destruction of government property, because you contract out with them. And you know, I got to tell you, when I signed that contract in MEPS, in the Military Entrance Processing Center, I got to tell you, Mark, that as soon as I signed it, my soul was screaming, you just made the worst mistake of your life. And I even said, I handed the paper in, and I went home and I said to my mother, I said, why do I have this feeling I made the worst mistake of my life? Why do I have this feeling? And it was my individual inside screaming, because I think it knew what was going to happen. Mark, thanks again for coming on.
You have a good one, man. Take
Take
care.
it easy, brother.